Hi, everyone. We are so lucky to have the filmmakers with us here tonight, Peter Ettedgui and Ian Bonhote. And I'm Emily Yoshida. I'm a critic at Vulture. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just trying to see how many people of you, and I can see. Thank you very much for coming down tonight.
Yeah,
it's
thank
a
you.
packed audience. Thank you.
It
Really,
really does
appreciate
mean
it.
so much to us to be here
Thank
on
you.
opening night at the Angelika.
So I wanted to start off just talking about those shows because you really kind of build the film around them, and they are these sort of punctuation or kind of chapter markers for the film itself. And I know we just came from a Q&A, so I have a cheat sheet a little bit. But you guys did mention that even that footage, that kind of house footage of the shows, is not necessarily being kept or archived officially at the company itself. And so I just wanted to ask a little bit about the process of kind of culling all that together and sourcing all of that material, both the fashion show footage, which is incredible, and also some of that more personal stuff.
Actually, it was a real challenge because it's not like now where as soon as a fashion show has happened, it's on social media. We found out that that fashion show footage, although some footage is available on YouTube, some of it's actually owned by the brand, so that and we weren't working with the brand, so we couldn't license that particular material. So we then had to sort of like track down these small production houses that throughout the 90s were kind of following around the fashion circuit and shooting shows in Milan and in Paris and in London. And they were, there was fashion TV in Toronto, Jeannie Becker, who became a great sort of like confidant of Lee McQueen's. So apart from shooting the shows, she was also sort of interviewing him. She gave some of the most candid and lovely interviews that he ever gave with her. Likewise, there was a show in Paris called Paris Mode, and all of these there were archives, but they were uncatalogued often and undigitized. And so it was a real job to kind of, and especially as we were in London, and we could go to Paris, but we couldn't necessarily hop over to Toronto. It was a huge operation, and it took a lot of time to actually bring that footage in. And then we learnt that Net-a-Porter also had been very quietly and stealthily building up their own archive. And they had things like Lee's very first student show, which we couldn't find anywhere. I mean, St. Martin's didn't have a full copy of it, of any good quality. And we found it astonishingly in the Net-a-Porter archive. So it was kind of sourcing it from all these different places. And it was a very satisfying process because we had decided to structure the whole film's narrative storytelling around the shows. So that was very gratifying.
Yeah, I was telling you too that as a teenager in Iowa, I would watch like tiny little QuickTime movies of those shows that I would download and over the course of an hour and then just scrutinize and watch over and over and over again. And so to see them presented so cinematically and with the beautiful music by Michael Nyman and the editing and also the context within his life, the context that you place around the shows and that really just adds to their meaning. I thought that was really, really well done. Did you have a particular moment or image or something that you were able to rediscover in the course of kind of going through all this footage?
Yeah, because when you start, we were not McQueen specialists. We didn't know every single look from every seasons. We were fans. We were really interested, but we came to it as filmmakers, not fashion insiders. We came to it because the story was obviously extremely interesting. The rags to riches. When you live in England, you're very well aware of the social class differences, and coming as a Cockney boy, gay Cockney boy, coming out and decided to go and become a fashion designer. the word fashion designer within the circle of friend and family, which just means, you know, making a few frock and selling them at the market down the road. Definitely not taking over at 26 years old one of the great fashion haute couture house, and then let alone setting up the only haute couture house in England. So all of that trajectory was fascinating. But regarding the show and precisely, I think what was really nice is, as filmmakers, is you just go back through it and see how much it might have influenced you as well, or people that you know around you. You know, all of, you know, the number 13 or the Kate Moss hologram. I remember I was in London, and MPC, which is a moving picture company, which is a very good post-production house. And I remember, I think at the time we were doing jobs there, and there was the word around of that great show being shot by Billy Walsh, which is, I think, an American director, actually. So, you know, everything was passionating and amazing to rediscover or discover for the first time.
And sometimes we'd find things, you know, we'd selected our main shows that we wanted to hang the story around. But sometimes we'd sort of like get to a moment in the film and there was a particular emotion we wanted to convey, and we didn't necessarily want to be on an interview. We wanted to be using archive. And suddenly we'd have a moment from a show that would just suggest itself. Like, there was, you know, like for example, that moment in that extraordinary wind tunnel.
That's one of my favorite parts.
It's incredible because you know, and it's and placing that in that sequence gave it such a strong sort of emotional push, and you know, we were often actually in tears in the edit, because when we found a moment like that, we just were aware of the cumulative emotional power that his story could have.
Yeah. And I think I remember going back and looking just for that specific moment, because I wanted to know, was that actually from a show around the time that you're talking about then, which is around the time he had his HIV diagnosis? And I don't think it was, but there's something about it. It doesn't matter, because the power of that moment in the show, I just think works so well with what he was going through at the time, that I just thought it was so affecting. Yeah.
Yeah, and the show, or some of the skull 3D we designed, kind of were visual metaphors of what was being expressed on screen, either by contributors or by Lee. And I think that's something we really wanted to do. Is we always wanted to make a documentary that was visually thrilling, and that would keep not only emotionally an audience involved, but feed people visually, because, you know, Lee was such a, you know, visionaire. So
yeah, I actually wanted to talk about that skull. We didn't get a chance to talk about that earlier. The skull motif that kind of runs throughout. I mean, obviously that's a very well-known, not exactly logo, I guess you would just call it a motif, that is now kind of inseparable from the Alexander McQueen brand. And I think could easily be mistaken as just kind of like logo work or kind of branding within the film itself. But I guess, can you talk a little bit about how you developed that design and how you mapped these different images and themes? Hi, F-Train. That creative process of that design, because I think it's so striking.
We started with the idea of the skull for the title sequence first. We didn't have quite yet the whole plan worked out, and we definitely didn't think we'll be using it that much throughout the film. So we approached some of our really good friends, which we've worked with throughout our careers. A company called Time-Based Arts, based in London, based actually probably 2 minutes walk from the Hoxton Square studio where Lee was living with Mira, and one of the first studio of Lee. Anyway, little aparté, sorry. And it became apparent they had great ideas, and we started, and it became apparent that because of the structure of the narrative and those chapter, we liked the idea to actually have real chapter. You know, some people thought, oh, maybe it might break the rhythm, but I think both of us, against some of the producers, we felt actually it's quite of nice. It gives a reason and an explanation, and Lee's titles and choice of titles of its shows almost had as much relevance as the show itself. You know, how many people are in fashion and gonna make a show called Island Rape? Do you see what I mean? And those, you know, that tells something about Lee. So even just the name. Anyway, so we started developing those skulls, and the idea of using them. Lee's actually skull itself. So that all of the skull are based on the sort of Lee skull. And we could talk all about them, and we don't have that much time. So I'll talk precisely about the one that ended up being in the poster, and that was designed by Gary James McQueen, which is Lee's nephew. And the way we design all of the others have been designed entirely in 3D and very good quality 3D. So the guys pushed it to as being as photorealistic as possible. That one we started in 3D. Gary designed it in 3D, but then we had a sculpture we actually built 1.5 meter high and let's say 60, 70 meters wide, 4, 5 feet by 2, 3 feet wide. And we made it for real. And then we used flowers inside, and we used the bird, and we really reshot that. So the bird flying off, this is not CGI, this is actually shot for real. So we like the idea of having things which are created with technology and stuff that are created like in the good old days. And another reason for us for doing that is we love distributors, but sometimes people choose the wrong imagery to represent your film. And we've really felt that, you know, for Lee, we really wanted to have one super strong image that they couldn't go away with it, you know, because Poland, United States of America, Latin America, China, you know, we wanted people to, you know, to really have, and we had it in the film, and we have it as the poster, and we're very proud that that worked as a campaign.
And also just to say that but one small thing, we both tend to go on a bit, for which apologies, and apologies especially to Emily. But one thing that's important to say is that it can come off as a bit of a sort of like, the skull can come off as a bit of a sensationalistic thing, but I think for both Lee McQueen and also very much for Gary, it's all rooted in the memento mori of Renaissance art and the vanitas skull, you know, and the notion that life is fleeting and that you have to seize the moment. And I think that we felt we didn't want to start the film with, it was a discussion at one point, do we start the film with the tragedy of his suicide and then sort of backtrack, which is a device that is often used in documentary storytelling. We thought that's not the right way to go, but we kind of wanted to have this sense of the intimation of mortality and the memento mori threaded through the film. So,
and I mean, he was clearly dealing with that in all of his work, you know, even before it became a part of his story in that way, you know.
Yeah, and it's taboo in fashion because fashion is about eternal youth.
Yeah.
And you kind of stick a skull in there. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of fashion designers and artists, I think McQueen started the contemporary, kick-started the contemporary trend of using skulls in fashion, in art, and so on. Schiaparelli, I think, had used it previously, but it really wasn't. There's a real sense of taboo about it in fashion.
I wanted to talk to you about the interviews that you did, because, as you mentioned, this isn't a project that was done with, you know, tight cooperation with the brand and with the company itself. So that meant that you were relying much more on interviews with people who were personal friends of his and his family members and the people who knew him best in his circle. And obviously you start hitting on a lot of very tough and sad subjects with them. And can you talk a little bit about your process or your process of gaining people's trust and just being sensitive as documenters and filmmakers?
Yeah, it was really tough, actually. We had our treatment and our visual pitch, and we got the money for it, and then it was like tumbleweed, because initially no one would speak to us. The brand didn't want to know, the family didn't want to know, and the close circle of friends were extremely wary, rightly so, because there's been a lot of very sensationalistic material written about Lee. And so it then took, we had a very short schedule. We made this film from beginning to end in 15 months, and we knew that was the most we would ever have. They were trying to make it shorter. But we could never kind of hassle and chase our contributors and say, we have to do it this week, please agree. We had to sort of pretend that we had all the time in the world, and we had to sort of like very slowly but surely sort of persuade them that we could be trusted and that we would do anything necessary to earn their trust and give them access to cuts of the film if they wanted to see it, to see how their material was being used. And I think what happened is that as 1 or 2 or 3 people came on board, word started to get around that perhaps after all we weren't a bad thing and that we could be trusted. And so having said, some of the most important interviews that we did were really in the last kind of couple of months of the edit. I mean, maybe Ian, you want to talk a little bit more about the family?
Yeah, and even on about our process is and that was really not appreciated by some of our producers. But sometimes we actually didn't force people to sign the release form. We just leave it with them so they could think about it. And we felt that risky, very risky. I don't advise that, but and we did. And it's not that we clever. I don't want to sound like that at all. But we felt like, oh my God, especially some of the very sensitive interviews like Janet, Gary, or even actually Seb. Yes. Seb took a while to convince, and actually we left him the contract. And actually other things we did, we actually felt that if they were sharing the story with us, they should share a bit of the film with us. I don't know how many people are into film. I don't want to go into details, but we felt like then we'll share some of, potentially if the film makes any money, they should make some money out of it. Not everyone in our producers agreed with us, but sometimes you just got to be a bit more tough nut and say that's it, or we walk out. But basically, yeah,
we threatened to walk out quite regularly. Actually,
we actually got kicked out as well. So they were, like every project, and there's a lot of issues all the time. But with the family, they said no initially, and thanks to an interview we did with an early PR person, Kim Blake, from with Lee, which actually we didn't use her interview, but she was very shy, so she's lovely and she's great and she said some good stuff, but she didn't come across in camera so good. And anyway, she introduced us to Gary, and we went to have a drink with Gary, and slowly we started to grow. They started to appreciate what we were doing. Again, you've got this French dude pretending he knows anything about London, and you've got Peter, and we're like, hey, we want to make a film about your brother. And we know that deep down in Iowa, a little girl used to watch it and made an impact. And there's all those things where people need to warm up to you, because basically they're going to share their life with you. Because when you make a film about Lee, those 26, 27 contributors, you talk about their story, because boyfriends, workers, family, it's their life. Even if it's a short window, they're really sharing very intense moments. So yeah, I diverge massively. So
it seems like, especially in his case too, I mean, that's a big subject of the film, is how much he emphasized having people that were very close to him, either family members or friends that may as well have been family members, and keeping those people in his circle.
Yeah, very much so. I mean,
he saw the close collaborator as a family, didn't he?
Yeah, he really did. And when you meet, I mean, all the people that we met, I mean, this is one of the things, is that McQueen had this kind of enfant terrible, badass image that he presented to the public, as you've seen, and that was very much, coming to the film. We knew there was something more there, obviously, and we'd done our research as well. But it was only when you started meeting people and seeing such love that he inspired in them, and how they described him, even in happier times, with kind of wonderment and tears in their eyes quite often. And then seeing him in some of the sort of like the home movie archive, being this sort of tender, sort of soppy with his dogs, and playing pranks and laughing, and that laugh, everyone talks about Lee's laugh. And we met with Philip Treacy, who didn't do an interview, but we spent an afternoon with him talking about Lee. The Milner, who was, Isabella Blow's other great find of the same period. And Philip said, it's Philip's like the kind of the orphan, the last person left of that small family of Lee, Philip, and Isabella. And Philip said, everyone talks about Lee and Isabella as these doomed, tragic heroes, but actually all I remember is just the laughter and the fun that we all had. So it was very important for us, because we knew that obviously we do have to confront the tragic climax of this story. But it was very, very important to us to really sort of show the light as well, and actually what a infectious personality he was.
Yeah, I mean, the relationships that he had, I mean, I think Isabella is probably the most well-known, but we were talking in the car just about how so many of them, especially with his female friends like Mira, were so close they were almost like marriages in a way. And I just feel like that's something where it's either going to be somebody's going to really open up to you and it's all going to come pouring out, or people will feel protective of it just because it's so close to them, it's so personal.
Yeah, I think that's something that's one thing we had under-evaluate, and truly, because we were excited to make the project. And you get a sense that because Lee is so amazing, and I'm hoping everyone in this room thinks the same, that people are going to openly talk about it. But I think we started the project in 2016-17, and it was only 6-7 years since his passing. And it's not that long ago, and for a lot of people that it's proven with mental health issues and people that actually take their life, a lot of people, of the close people and family, tend to blame themselves. So they have to go through a huge amount of work on themselves in their own personal space and time, and then suddenly you've got people wanting them to open up. And I can't remember we said it today or earlier, or everything's becoming a bit of a blur, but
to open up on camera as well,
that's what to open up on camera and accept it, to potentially have hundreds of thousands of people seeing it. I mean, Gary and Janet, I think, we're very close, we talk a lot, and what they say, we feel very responsible, that the film had to be as good as we could make it in the time we could, because as well, I just feel that, they share at least DNA. I believe in cis family. I believe in family we recreate outside maybe our DNA family, and I feel that family is amazing. But at the same time, that DNA family, I mean, Janet is the loveliest woman, but she can have a really bad temper. And literally, she says it
like
herself.
Like a brother.
Like Lee, And they would not speak for 6 months, and then they would really reconnect. And we felt that bad temper at times, and we had to handle that as well. But that meant we were working with Lee.
I just think the sensitivity and the I think emotional intelligence you had around approaching these interviews really pays off in the film. Thank you, Ian and Peter, also.